Okay, welcome to our webinar. In today's session, we'll discuss how your peers are handling the current business environment and also bring to your attention the one big risk that IT owns that's currently being overlooked and can have some major impact on your businesses. There will be a Q&A session at the end, so please use the Q&A window in your Zoom console to ask any questions, and we'll get to them at the end of this presentation. My name's Anand Ganpal. I run product marketing at Resolver, and I'll be joined by my colleagues, Peter and Riley. Peter, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is, I'm Peter Nguyen. I'm Resolver's General Counsel and also Chief Privacy Officer, joined by our colleague, Riley.
Hi, I'm Riley Tai. I'm the Product Manager for our IT Risk and Compliance Applications at Resolver.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Riley. So in this webinar, we'll discuss the current state of IT and how companies are managing in the post-COVID world. Then Peter will highlight the next risk you need to be on top of, the risk of your upcoming IT certifications, and Riley will demonstrate how to manage these certifications effectively in this new environment with the risk and control owners remote and distracted by their own business issues. Now let's start with some fresh data. 2 weeks ago on April 9th, in association with RIMS, the Risk Management Society, we surveyed over 200 risk professionals with the question, what has been the biggest COVID-19 impact to your organization? Mobilizing a remote workforce was by far the #1 response, with 49% of companies indicating that even with everything going on, managing a remote workforce was the #1 biggest impact to their business. Now, companies, it's no surprise, right? Companies had to rapidly decentralize their workforce, where many risk and resilience plans called for moving workers to other corporate offices. It was the rare plan that anticipated everyone having to work from home immediately overnight. This immediately put pressure on IT teams to have not only the available hardware and software and infrastructure to support this massive shift, but also the communications and training to help employees be productive in their new environments. In the other ones, 16% of risk professionals are finding that the biggest impact to be customer demand shocks as physical locations are closed, demand for online and zero contact services replace traditional products, and people are being more careful with their money. 15% are finding the financial pressure of their high fixed cost and changing buyer behavior to have the biggest impacts. And finally, 14% find that supply chain destabilization is the largest factors, as their factories, stores, transportation, and distribution facilities are shutting down. So let's focus on working from home. When we think about how COVID-19 security measures are affecting organizational networks, there are several interrelated problems. One, employees are working from home networks, sometimes home computers. These systems are much more likely to be out of date, unpatched, unprotected, more vulnerable to attack simply because they are less secure. Two, sensitive organizational data will likely migrate outside of the network. Employees working from home are going to save data on their own computers where they're not protected by the organization's security systems, either physical or cyber. This makes data more likely to be hacked and stolen. In fact, Marriott just announced another data breach affecting 5.2 million customers, and this was due to 2 employees having their credentials stolen. 3, employees are more likely to access their organizational networks insecurely. If you're lucky, you've already set up a VPN for remote access. If not, you're either trying to get one quickly, looking at zero trust solutions, or not bothering at all. Handing people VPN software to install and use with no training is a recipe for security mistakes, but it's better than having no VPN at all. 4, employees are being asked to use new and unfamiliar tools like Zoom to replace face-to-face meetings. Again, these hastily set up systems are likely to be insecure, carry unfamiliar risk, like what's up with Zoom bombing? What is wrong with those people? 5, the general chaos of doing things differently is an opening for attack. The standard tricks like business email compromise, where your employee gets a fake email from an executive asking for an account transfer, is more likely to succeed when the employee can't walk down the hall to verify that the person actually sent the email to them. And everyone's so distracted with so many things being different, it is just a recipe for making an incorrect decision. In fact, we've seen that NASA has reported a doubling of phishing attacks, and not only that, but doubling of successful attempts on their users, and as well as an exponential increase on the malware attacks on their system. So with IT dealing with all these areas to secure the business, it's really easy to overlook the key risk that can severely impact your revenue, which is your IT certifications. And I'll pass it over to Peter to discuss this in more detail.
Thanks, Anand. As I mentioned in the intro, I'm Resolver's general counsel, and I've been practicing law for close to 20 years in private practice and in-house counsel roles, primarily supporting technology companies with their commercial contracts, typically on the vendor supplier side, organizations like Resolver. And I'd say over the past 20 years, the issue of data information security has definitely come to the forefront in contracts. And in my experience, this is probably the element of commercial contracts that has experienced the most change in that amount of time. This is probably coinciding with increasing legislation and regulations in the area of data privacy and the corresponding interest in ensuring that there are proper data privacy practices through the implementation of best practices, and the increasing role of software as a service vendors that are anchored in cloud computing infrastructure, raising questions and concerns from prospects and customers. I'd say that it's pretty rare today that there are any vendor contracts that don't contemplate the vendor potentially handling sensitive information, including personal data and or personally identifiable information. And this is especially true of SaaS vendors. So what's the consequence? You know, I'd say a lot of the time I spend prior to and during the contracting process is spent discussing matters related to data privacy handling practices and the corresponding InfoSec measures that a vendor has to put in place to ensure, among other things, the security of the PII and personal data processed by the vendor. This increases the time it takes to close, and for those of you who are on the vendor side of things, this increases your financial risk to your organization not being able to close deals in time and or extending the amount of time it takes to close a deal. And sort of the hack or way to short circuit this process is for vendor organizations to invest the time, money, and effort to achieve certainly internationally recognized InfoSec certifications, the most notable ones being the International Organization for Standardization's ISO 27000 series standards, and the AICPA, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, Service Organization Controls, or more commonly known as SOC. And in my view, these are absolutely critical for two reasons. One, it provides customers with the assurance that vendors such as Resolver have taken the appropriate steps as audited by reputable third parties to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, availability, security, and privacy of the information entrusted to them by their customer. And it definitely shortens the conversation about InfoSec, as I alluded to earlier, in the pre and in-flight negotiation process. And secondly, and a related point, it really has become a de facto requirement made by customers and prospects, a de minimis threshold, if you will, for vendors to have obtained the certification. When I joined Resolver 4 years ago, terms like SOC 2 and ISO were certainly not as critical as they are today, not part of the lexicon. But in that short period of time, it's just as common to have a customer or a prospect ask for our ISO and SOC certifications as much as they are to ask for our certificates of insurance. It's really a mandatory obligation. And so this all ties into a legal impact, which is it relates to limitation of liabilities. As most of you know, contracts typically contemplate a cap on liability in the event of a breach, typically done at, let's say, 12 months value worth of fees. What often happens is that customers will say, that's fine, but for matters relating to information security and data privacy, we need a carve out. And for that, we expect you to take on uncapped, unlimited liability. And this poses incredible risk to the organization because a simple breach of an InfoSec obligation, including maintenance of certification, I'll touch on that in a second, could lead to catastrophic outcomes for the customer. And therefore, the vendor could end up bearing the brunt of that and potentially putting it in a position for not being able to sustain unrecoverable losses. So in the present circumstance of remote work, this is definitely a new risk. As I mentioned earlier, maintaining certification is definitely an obligation that we see more and more in the contracts that we deal with. And how do you do so in a remote work environment? Failure to maintain that certification, which is typically done on an annual basis, could definitely trigger a breach of the InfoSec obligations, which then triggers a potential review of the limitation liability provisions, which are typically, as I mentioned, on an unlimited basis. So how do we mitigate that risk? Well, I think my colleague Riley can certainly speak to that. Riley, over to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen in just a second. And hopefully I've done this properly. You should be able to see Resolver Core. So capturing different compliance goals within the tool and helping our customers move towards certification is something that we're well accustomed to. And typically what we're trying to help our customers achieve is really a centralizing of those efforts, trying to help expedite different evidence capturing initiatives and really trying to maximize that evidence as well. And when it comes to evidence, you're actually trying to decentralize that, which is making it a little bit easier to capture that from the different business users that are going to be providing their screenshots, their documents, their PDFs that are required for certification. And so that's typically what we help with the tool. It has been a really interesting shift as we move towards remote. And as Peter said, we are definitely seeing an environment where certifications are not stopping. They're still mandated, they're still required. And it's introducing a lot of challenges, especially as you're trying to capture that evidence and then provide that evidence as well. So we're going to cover some of the tooling that we've included that helps in regular certification processes, but we'll definitely touch on trying to maintain oversight into your issues and ease that evidence capturing process and sharing process to help during these remote times. So to start, we will show one of the goals that our customers typically come to us with. This is Resolver Core here, and we're greeted with a citation coverage report or a framework coverage report. And we can see some of the frameworks that are going to be important to this organization. So we have SOC 2, ISO, and it's important to note that Resolver is agnostic to these frameworks. But what we're trying to do is help our customers build towards compliance by having evidence coverage. And that's what we're seeing here. SOC 2 and ISO do have control coverage, and we're working towards it with a few of the NIST frameworks, depending on our specific goals. And that's where a lot of our customers come to us, is they likely are working towards one framework or multiple frameworks. And we try to make it very simple for them to go through, capture the evidence in a central place, and then understand and visualize their progress towards coverage. So we can clearly see working towards NIST 853, very expansive framework, and we are working towards coverage there. And as we start to build that control coverage, we start moving into the certification process. And we handle that process start to finish. So I'll show another visual that'll demonstrate that as well. And now we're looking more at a single framework here. This is our SOC 2 certification effort. I can see the external auditor who's coming in, the tentative dates that we're pushing towards through the tool. And we have an overarching view of the status of this particular effort. 30% evidence is ready, reviewed, and captured to be shared with the external auditors. And we get a breakdown of those efforts here as well. And so that's really the two goals for us, is helping you build that control coverage so you're ready and compliant for certification efforts, and then helping you from start to finish with those certification components. So if we move from here, I'll show you what that looks like within the tool. And we navigate towards IT compliance. We can see the story told across the top here. And as you can see, it really includes every stage. We're understanding what elements of SOC 2 are applicable to us. We're asking for that evidence to come through. We're reviewing it, and then we're sharing it with the external auditors within the tool. And we'll find that some of these elements are actually made quite easy with the tool in a remote environment. If we move towards the framework, we have gone through and brought in all components directly within the tool. So we can see here, again, 30% completion status, but we do have entire control coverage. And on the left-hand side, we get a breakdown of the framework. Here's SOC 2, the different categories that exist within SOC 2, the subcategories as well, and that leads down to the baseline requirement. And that's what we have here. And so what we want to do is make sure it's very easy for you to see and understand this information. We will also go through and try and provide suggested evidence or sample evidence as well to provide further context about what these actually mean. What is it asking for in CC 6.8? And then with that, we can look towards how we're managing this. And what we're doing here is we're really taking a central library of evidence and tagging that evidence against these requirements. And that's what we see with VPN services here. Great example, and Nod talked about it as well, especially with BYOD devices. Taking into VPN services is going to be crucial. Here, we're able to go through and dictate exactly what we need from this based on the requirement from SOC 2. So I'll assign an individual here, who we'll see in just a second, and we'll go through and provide suggested evidence, examples for this individual to give to us. And what's nice about this is that we're really going to try and maximize evidence. And if we're having difficulties communicating with our staff, maybe because we're separated, it's going to be really important to be able to take a piece of evidence like VPN services and have it be widely applicable where it is applicable. And that's what we're seeing here, is being able to take a single piece of evidence, and this is the exact same document. And it updates very quickly, so sometimes it's hard to show. But if we go through and we add a piece of text here or a piece of evidence here, it does ripple to every instance of this. And what that means is we're creating an environment now that when we're going through our certification effort, when we ask Raymond for this piece of evidence, he adds it once into the system. And whether it's for SOC 2 in 5 different instances here or across SOC 2 and ISO and NIST, that piece of evidence will ripple to any of those relevant places, which definitely shortcuts quite a bit of work. It should be important to mention that we also do provide mappings as well, which will help you understand where there are partial applicabilities between different requirements. So I'm going to flip over now and just take a quick look at what Raymond would see when he logs in, because again, that's going to be a big element for us, is we want to be able to clearly communicate with our users within the system to let them know exactly what we're asking them for, and making sure that it's simple to collect it from them. We find a lot of customers struggle doing the back and forth. You know, I'm looking for this, oh no, that document's not quite right, it doesn't have a timestamp, and you go through elements of version control that can be quite tedious. So we've logged in as Raymond. He would likely get an email, but we do treat this as a hub. He's greeted with a really simple report here that helps with engagement and just explains what he's responsible for. He's got 3 controls, 3 pieces of evidence that are listed here, and any of his pending work will always be found under his My Tasks. So we can see the control we had asked for him before. We select into this, and now what we want to do is just provide as much information as possible to make this as simple for Raymond to complete. So everything is explained. He has the ability to work through the 2 different steps that we've included here. The first is evidence submission. And what we can see here is we've gone through and we've taken elements from SOC 2 and really distilled them down into portions that he understands. So very, very simple for him to come in and say, this is clearly what Riley is asking me for. He can include his files by dragging and dropping here or adding a web link for SharePoint or any of the online file directory systems. So very, very simple for him to go through and ask for or be able to provide that evidence. The second portion there is some of our customers will do an operating effectiveness as well. And this is not something we always see. It's either design or operating, but it does give the opportunity for a control self-assessment. One piece that both our auditors and our customers really enjoy is the comment section towards the bottom. And this allows for a really agile conversation to occur and really reduces that back and forth, kind of enhancing communication here. And what we're able to do is create a dialogue. So we can see that I've asked Raymond to make sure that he's taking proper screenshots when he shows the application. He can come through and respond to these and create a thread. He can also come through and ask me questions as well. And what's nice is it keeps it centralized. If we think about version control issues that you might have, this is actually taking that conversation and tagging it against that evidence. And so for our team, as we're trying to go through and become SOC 2 compliant, we can just go through, have that conversation right on the piece of evidence. There's no issues with really back and forth or tedious kind of tracking. It's all in one place where we can have that dialogue, and it drives us towards better evidence faster. Anecdotally, we use this tool for our SOC 2 and ISO certification efforts. Our auditors love this as well, because we can offer them this type of dialogue. We provide them with a really similar view that allows them to be able to remotely access any of the evidence we provide. And if there's any issues or questions, they use this comment methodology to just go through and have a quick dialogue. And whether it's uploading a new piece or clarifying a portion, the conversation is really around that document and much shorter to get to the desired outcome. So all of this is in the pursuit of capturing the correct evidence and making sure that we're maximizing that evidence as it's coming through. The next portion that we're going to look at is really managing some of the other pieces. So typically it's difficult for groups to collect that evidence, and then if there are gaps, to maintain that oversight. So we do have quite a few options to bring any gaps that arise to the forefront. And so as you're going through, evidence is being submitted, you're going to understand that there are those gaps that exist, and what we're able to do is capture those and pull them into single dashboards. And so you'll notice this is SOC 2 based. We can do it corporate-wide. We usually break it down by the different frameworks you're using, and it lets me see really clearly when these are coming through and what types of issues are coming in. And so this is really nice because once you identify the issue, the system's taking care of it. You can see elements like overdue, and that's because we have a workflow engine that's saying this type of policy needs to be developed. Who's taking care of that, and are we prompting them to include their progress in the system? Reports like this also tap into our temporal data warehouse and really let us understand our progress through time. We found this to be really helpful when we're doing retrospectives to understand, okay, if we kicked off last June, when are we seeing pieces come through? How many issues are being identified and when are they being resolved? And so it's really interesting to help us understand the true life cycle of working towards certification and then starting to think about next year's certification and being that much more effective. So quite a bit here to really try and maintain that oversight and have the tool take care of some neat communication efforts with our staff. The final component is going to be pulling it all together. And so that's what we have here is a progress report. And what's really nice about the tool is IT compliance is simple. It's capturing evidence, but our customers always have unique needs. And so what we can do is start to combine views that make sense for you as well. So we can take a look at completion status over the year as you're hopefully trending towards 100 and getting a breakdown of how we're progressing. We can always maintain oversight into how our authority documents are being completed. And again, pushing through each one of these steps, ensuring that when we're going through, we're asking everyone for evidence and capturing that through the prompts that are coming from the system, being able to review it and then remotely share that with our external auditors who are going to need to see it. The final component then is just making sure that we do have awareness into any of the gaps. It's difficult to track gaps, especially if you're working in different tools. This helps to bring them all together so that you can have a clear understanding of what is being identified and how it's being taken care of. So those are some of the options that we've been working with our customers on, and a few pieces that we found to be a little bit more important or valuable during these remote times. So that was everything I was hoping to show. I know that we have about 8 minutes left. We would love to open the floor to any questions that anyone had as well.
Riley, could you stop sharing so I can flip over to the slides?
Of course.
Okay, thanks a lot, Riley. So to summarize what we went through in this presentation, number one is that remote work has been the biggest challenge for organizations due to COVID-19. Number two, managing a new set of IT risks makes it too easy to overlook the upcoming IT certifications. And three, a Resolver's IT risk and compliance solutions helps remote work teams effectively achieve certifications. So as Riley was saying, that was our session today, and we do have a couple questions that have come in for Q&A. So let's go through those. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A panel. I'll go backwards with the questions that we got. The first one was for Riley. Riley, is this tool designed just for SOC 2, or were there any other certifications that we can use this to support?
Yeah, no, great question. The tool is meant to be framework agnostic. So SOC 2 is something we're seeing much more traction with. We have a really deep content set for SOC 2, but our content library extends across ISO, NIST, PCI, HIPAA, and any of the custom frameworks our customers come to us with as well. So it definitely works for any type of framework in the certification effort with those.
Okay, thanks, Riley. This second question was for Peter, and it was around, can you outline exactly what a customer is legally entitled to if our certifications expire?
Yeah, great question. I think typically the analysis would be any sort of breach of contract analysis. Obviously, in the contract, there's an obligation by a vendor, let's say, to say that we'll maintain the certifications. And typically a contract will say then, if you breach that obligation, failure to meet that certification, there's usually a cure period. Unfortunately, that's usually limited to 30 days, and the likelihood of an organization being able to obtain certification within the 30 days is probably pretty rare, especially in relation to SOC 2 or ISO certification. So the analysis is there's a breach, Have you had the ability to cure that breach? If not, what a customer could potentially do is terminate the contract and then sue for damages. The question there then becomes, to what extent damages are payable, what the quantum of damages are. Let's say that customer had an obligation under a government regulation to maintain that standard, and that they're subject to a fine. What you'll likely find is that customer trying to pass that fine on to a vendor for failure to meet that certification obligation. So that's just one example.
Thanks, Peter. We have one more question so far. If there are any more, please enter in the Q&A panel. But the final one was one that I'll take. And the question is, when will this trend towards remote work stop? How are companies planning to return back into their facilities from remote environments? And that is really interesting. We did a session about this with the Risk Management Institute, and what we find is that, I mean, certainly it varies from company to company and industry to industry. Remote work is feasible and successful in certain companies or certain industries compared to others. But what we're seeing is that regardless of that, the majority of companies are going to be taking a gradual approach. It tends to be starting to phase in with a physical sales, service, and distribution presence to support their customers and support their revenue streams more successfully. And we'll see the back office being remote for longer. In terms of time frame, I mean, I think we've all seen the various models, and from a corporate perspective, it seems that most executives are taking a long-term view of this and really planning towards a more remote workforce for the next year or potentially longer. Okay, that was all we had. I don't see any other questions. And that's our session for today. So a reminder that the webinar and all the slides will be available in the next few days and distributed to you. So I'd like to thank Peter Nguyen and Riley Tai for their time and expertise. So as we sit behind the safety of our laptops, a message for those who have family and friends on the front lines for this crisis. From Resolver and all our panelists, we really thank them and appreciate them. And thank you everyone for joining the session.